My dear brothers and sisters, many times in the Bible, God proved His power on the ocean, the circumstances surrounding the ocean, the boat, the ship. For example, when Jonah did not want to obey the Lord, through the storm in the sea, God made him realize His power. And also today in the gospel, we have a situation where Jesus proves His power through the boat that was about to shrink. And this is because if there is one place where human beings cannot control the situation, it is the ocean and the boat. And ocean and the boat is a place where we are utterly helpless, where we need to depend only on God, because that is something that we as humans have no control of it absolutely, except to completely offer ourselves and depend on God's mercy. We can control many other situations to some extent, but the storms, when there is a storm in the sea and our boat is in the sea, there we are utterly and totally helpless. And out of helplessness comes faith. And that's what Jesus proves today. And today I want to make a reflection, and my reflection consists of 7 points based on today's gospel, where our spiritual life we can draw by these 7 points. The first one, don't be surprised by the fact that even when we follow Jesus faithfully, still suddenly we find that we are in the midst of a storm. We read from the gospel today, and when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. And if we observe the verses before today's gospel, 3 people wanted to follow him, but Jesus said to them different answers. You know, the Son of Man has no place to live. And then that fellow went back. And another fellow wanted to bury his father, and he also went back. So contrary to the people who went away without following Jesus, these are the people who were following Jesus with him. That's why the gospel says, when he got into the boat, his disciples followed him. We don't know what happened to the people who did not follow him, but to the people that followed him, they suddenly find themselves in the midst of a storm. And we need to understand, it happens to us that when we follow Jesus, we are not away from the storms. In spite of the fact that we follow him, many times in our life, we are found suddenly in the midst of a storm. And we should not be surprised at that, because it is part of his plan for our growth and development. And that is the first reflection. And the second point is that we should be confident that even when Jesus seems like he is sleeping, he is still present in the storm with us. He knows what's going on, and he is able to do whatever is needed when the time comes. So sometimes Jesus seems to be sleeping, but the important fact is not whether he is sleeping or awake, but the question is whether he is with us or not with us. When he is with us, even though he appears to be sleeping, nothing will happen to us. And that is the lesson that we need to draw, the second lesson of spiritual life. That Jesus' presence should matter to us, even though he seems to be silent, even though sometimes he seems to be deaf, even though he sometimes seems to be blind to our cries and our prayers. But The question is whether He is with us in the boat or in the storm or not. And the third point of spiritual life that we can draw from this is that we should remember to cry out to Him. It is the greatest thing that we can do in the storm. Don't be silent. When you see the storm, like the apostles, the disciples did, pray. Tell Him that you are afraid. Don't pretend that you are not afraid when you are actually afraid. Today, the world is afraid, and let us acknowledge the fact that we are afraid of coronavirus. And when we don't acknowledge that we are afraid, no prayer can come out from our hearts. We cannot pray. That's why the third lesson that we need to draw is we should cry out to Him and let Him know of our fears, and He will answer our prayer. And the fourth lesson, the fourth point, let's be of good courage and of strong faith in the midst of the storm. Don't be timid or cowardly because of the lack of faith, because He loves us and will never abandon us. But don't give Him a reason to rebuke your sinful attitude before He rebukes the storm. You observe what Jesus has done today? He rebuked 2 times. First, He rebuked the disciples, and only then He rebuked the storm. It is because of the lack of faith. So, the lesson that we need to draw is, let Him not rebuke us because of our lack of faith. Because He said, why are you afraid, you people of little faith? So it's a rebuke from Jesus first to the disciples, and only He rebuked the storm and the sea. Let's not give that opportunity to Him. That is the fourth point. And number 5, rest assured in the knowledge that He can transform the storm from a great tempest to a great calm. Let us have this faith that Jesus has the power, Jesus has the authority to change a stormy situation to a situation of great calm. No matter what it is, it could be a storm in the physical sense, or it could be a storm that arises in your heart because of the lack of peace, or a storm in the family due to a health condition or economical situation. Whatever it is, but let us understand and always believe that Jesus has the power to change the storm into calm. And number 6, watch and learn from Him as He teaches you in the midst of the storm that He is sovereign over every area of our life, and that even the wind and the sea must obey the commands of the one who is our greatest friend. He has control of everything because He is sovereign. That's why King David in Psalm 107 from verses 23, he reaffirms this fact that God is the sovereign and He has control of every situation. Psalm 107 verse 23 onwards. Some went down to the sea in the ships, doing business on the mighty waters. They saw the deeds of the Lord, His wondrous works in the deep. For He commanded and raised the stormy wind, which lifted up the waves of the sea. They mounted up to heaven, they went down to the depths. Their courage melted away in their calamity. They reeled and straggled like drunkards, and were their wits' end. And they cried out to the Lord in their trouble, and He brought them out from their distress. He made the storm be still, and the waves of the sea were hushed. Then they were glad because they had quiet, and He brought them to their desired heaven. So the lesson 6 that we learn is He has the control of everything. He is completely sovereign. And the last lesson that we learn is, and it is important lesson, that when it is over, he proves himself once again to you, worship him. When the situation has changed from fear to calmness, we need to acknowledge him and worship him. And where do we see this? Verse 27. They were amazed, the disciples were amazed, saying, what sort of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? So in the version of Matthew, the word that is used is, they were amazed. Whereas the same incident in other like Gospel of Mark and Luke, the same version, we read that they were terrified. You see, there was fear at the beginning of the incident, and at the end also there is a terror in the hearts of the disciples, but both are not the same. In the beginning of the incident, that before the storm, the fear was because of the storm, because they thought they were going to die. But the end, when they were amazed, the terror in their hearts was, it is a fear with devotion, because they have seen the power of the Lord. And that's why the fear of the Lord is the beginning of the wisdom. We need to have fear, but that should be the fear of the Lord, not the fear of the storms. And the disciples had that, and that is called worship. So we learn all these 7 lessons from these 4 verses in the gospel today, that we can grow in our spiritual life in spite of the fact that when we follow him, we have storms in our lives. And these storms are not new to the church. That's why today we commemorate the martyrs, the first martyrs of the Roman Church, of the Catholic Church in Rome. And the earliest known episode of persecution took place in the time of the Emperor Nero. By the year 60, that is roughly less than 30 years after the death of Jesus, Christianity already spread to Rome. In the early 60s, Paul writes a letter to Christian community in Rome, letter to the Romans. And both Peter and Paul were already in Rome. Yesterday, we celebrated the feast of Saint Peter and Paul, their martyrdom. And not only Peter and Paul, but so many others, few hundreds or thousands, were martyred. And that's why today, immediately following their feast day yesterday, today we commemorate these martyrs. In the year 64, in the month of July, it is told that there was a great fire in Rome. And what we know from this is from the history, not from hear and say, not from the tradition. A historian by name Tacitus, who was actually a direct witness, a first witness, writes about this fire. And there is a saying that while Rome was being burnt, Nero was playing the violin. Rome కాలిపోతుంటే ఈ నేరో చక్రవర్తి పిడేలు వాయించుకుంటున్నాడు అని. The saying goes to show that he did not care. That is the meaning. And the reason for this fire is told that he himself put it on fire. He wanted to destroy the entire Rome because he was building a golden house. It's a big complex for himself. So he wanted to destroy the existing city. So he put it on fire and he went on to play violin. And then he did not want to take the blame on himself. So he put this blame in the name of the new movement that was coming, namely on Christianity. Now, you will watch a video clipping of the fire that took place in Rome in the year 64 and what happened following those incidents. While I read from you from what this historian wrote about how these Christians were martyred and whose commemoration we are celebrating today, whose martyrdom we are celebrating today. I will read for you and you can watch the clipping video. This is recounted by Tacitus in his own words. But all human efforts, all the lavish gifts of the emperor and the propitiations of the gods did not banish the sinister belief that conflagration was the result of an order. Consequently, to get rid of the report, the Emperor Nero fastened the guilt and inflicted most exquisite tortures on a class hated for their abominations, called Christians by the populace. Christus, from whom the name had its origin, suffered the extreme penalty during the reign of Tiberius at the hands of one of our procurators, Pontius Pilate, and a most mischievous superstition, thus checked for the moment, again broke out not only in Judea, the first source of the evil, but even in Rome, where all things hideous and shameful from every part of the world find their center and become popular. Accordingly, an arrest was first made of all who pleaded guilty. Then, upon their information, an immense multitude was convicted, not so much on the crime of firing the city as of hatred against mankind. Mockery of every sort was added to their deaths. Covered with the skins of beasts, they were torn by dogs and perished, or were nailed to the crosses, or were doomed to the flames and burnt to serve as a nightly illumination when daylight had expired. Nero offered his gardens for the spectacle and was exhibiting a show in the circus, while he mingled with the people in the dress or stood aloft on a car. Hence, even for criminals who deserved extreme and exemplary punishment, there arose a feeling of compassion. For it was not, as it seemed, for the public good, but to glut one man's cruelty that they were being destroyed. You see what is written? They were tortured in the most barbaric way, the Christians. They were dressed with the skins of the animals so that the dogs would eat them. And they would their bodies were put into the flames and burnt to serve as a nightly illumination in darkness. And they were nailed to the crosses. My dear friends, this was the amount of persecution that the early church suffered. That's why it is said Christianity is built and developed not by the ink of the writers, but by the blood of the martyrs. And if not for these martyrs, Christianity could not have spread as it has spread today to all the countries of the world. So let us follow the examples of today's martyrs whom we celebrate, and let us pray that we may be courageous when it comes to manifesting our faith in the Lord. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit.